The human ship Aurora's Dawn moved slowly through space toward the biggest structure Lisa Monroe had ever seen. The Galactic Council Station stretched across the sky like a metal city floating among the stars. Lights twinkled from thousands of windows, and ships from dozens of different worlds came and went like busy insects around a hive. Lisa stood in the observation deck, watching their destination grow larger. She was 53 years old and had spent most of her life talking to world leaders and solving problems between countries. But this was different. This was humanity's first invitation to join something much bigger than Earth. "Nervous?" asked Jake Harrison as he walked up beside her. The colonel was tall and strong, with gray hair and steady hands that had held weapons in battles across 3 star systems. His uniform was perfectly neat, but Lisa could see the worry in his eyes. "A little," Lisa admitted. "We've been preparing for this moment for 5 years, ever since they sent the invitation. But I still don't understand why they made an exception for us." Jake touched the weapon on his belt. Every human in the diplomatic team was allowed to carry arms, even though the Galactic Council had banned weapons for all other species for over 1,000 years. The Council's message had been clear. Humans were different. They were allowed to bring weapons. They were expected to bring weapons. "Maybe they know something we don't," Jake said. Dr. Nathan Price joined them at the window. He was younger than the others, maybe 35, with messy brown hair and clothes that never seemed to fit right. But his mind was sharp, and he knew more about alien life than anyone else on Earth. "I've been reading the files again," Nathan said, holding up his tablet. 847 different species in the Council. Most of them eat plants or filter tiny organisms from water. Only 12 species evolved from hunters like us, and all of them have been changed.
"Changed how?" Lisa asked. "Genetic modifications. They removed the parts of their brains that think about fighting or violence. They did it to themselves centuries ago. They say it brought them peace." Lisa frowned. "Then why do we get to keep
"Our weapons. That's what worries me," Nathan said quietly. The ship's speaker crackled to life. "Attention, passengers. We are beginning our approach to Council Station. Please prepare for docking procedures." Through the window, they could see the docking bay opening like a giant mouth. The bay was enormous, designed to hold ships from many different worlds. Some ships looked like smooth eggs, others like crystal formations, and a few resembled living creatures more than machines. As they got closer, Lisa noticed something strange. Among all the different docking equipment, she could see structures that looked like they were built specifically for human ships. Security scanners, atmospheric, processors, even gravity generators, all sized and shaped for human needs. But humans had never been here before. "How long did you say this station has been here?" she asked Nathan. He checked his notes. "According to the files they sent us, about 12,000 years, built by someone called the Architects." "And they built human-sized equipment 12,000 years ago?" Nathan's face went pale as he realized what she was thinking. "That's impossible. Humans barely had farming 12,000 years ago." The docking procedure was smooth and quiet. As soon as the ship connected to the station, Jake felt the artificial gravity adjust to Earth normal levels. Another sign that someone had prepared for humans long before humans had prepared for them. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and their first alien greeted them. Council Aide Veltar floated in the air like a large, transparent jellyfish. Beautiful colors flowed through its body as it spoke in perfect English. "Welcome, representatives of humanity. I am Veltar, and I have been assigned to guide you through your first day among the Council. Please follow me." The corridors of the station were wide and tall, with walls that seemed to be made of some kind of living metal. Soft light came from everywhere and nowhere, and the air smelled faintly of flowers Lisa couldn't identify. Other aliens moved through the halls, and Lisa was amazed by the variety. Some walked on legs like humans, others floated or rolled or moved in ways that seemed to ignore gravity entirely. But all of them stopped and stared when they saw the human group pass by. "They're staring at our weapons," Jake muttered under his breath. "No," Nathan said, studying the aliens' faces. "They're staring at us. Look at their eyes. They're not afraid or angry. They're hopeful?" Veltar led them to a conference room where dozens of beings sat around a circular table that seemed to stretch on forever. The room was silent as the humans entered, hundreds of alien eyes tracking their every movement. "Honored council members," Veltar announced, "I present Ambassador Lisa Monroe and her delegation from the world called Earth." An ancient being that looked like it was made of living stone spoke first. Its voice was deep and slow, like distant thunder. "We are Keth Moran, speaker for the mineral worlds. We welcome humanity to the council, though we confess we do not fully understand why the ancient protocols grant you privileges that no other species enjoys." Lisa stepped forward. "We're honored by your invitation, Speaker Keth Moran, but we're also confused. Why are humans allowed to carry weapons when others cannot?" A creature that seemed to be made of flowing water rippled with what might have been laughter. "Because, dear humans, you are the first species we have encountered in 50,000 years that has not forgotten how to fight. But fighting is bad," said a small, furry being with large, innocent eyes. "Fighting causes pain and sadness. Why would anyone want to remember how to fight?" Jake felt his hand move instinctively toward his weapon as something cold crawled up his spine. "Because sometimes," he said slowly, "fighting is the only way to protect the things you love." The entire council chamber fell silent. Many of the aliens looked confused, as if Jake had spoken in a language they couldn't understand. Others looked frightened, but a few, the older ones, the ones who seemed to have lived through more history, looked relieved. Veltar's colors shifted to what the humans would learn meant deep concern. "Colonel Harrison speaks of concepts that most council species cannot fully comprehend. Their minds have been adjusted to prevent the psychological trauma that comes from thoughts of violence. But the adjustment has costs." "What kind of costs?" Lisa asked. An elderly alien that looked like a walking tree spoke in a voice like rustling leaves. "When you cannot imagine violence, you cannot prepare for it. When you cannot prepare for it, you cannot recognize it when it comes. And when you cannot recognize it..." The tree being's voice trailed off and its leaves trembled. "When you cannot recognize it," continued a new voice from the chamber's entrance, "you cannot survive it." The speaker was unlike any alien they had met. It walked on two legs like a human, but its skin was dark gray and covered in scars. Its eyes burned with an intelligence that seemed almost human in its intensity. "I am war leader Thaklor of the Draknari," the scarred being said. "My people were warriors once before we chose to forget how to fight. I am the last of my kind who remembers the old ways, kept alive by illegal genetic treatments and hidden memories." Thaklor looked directly at Jake, and Jake saw something in those alien eyes that he recognized. The look of a soldier who had seen too much but still stood ready to fight. "The beacons have awakened," Thaklor said. "The same beacons that have slept since the architects vanished. They sing now, calling across the galaxy, and we fear we know what is answering their call." Lisa felt the weight of history settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Whatever humanity had walked into, it was much bigger than a simple diplomatic mission. Outside the station's windows, the stars continued to shine peacefully. But somehow, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that the peace was about to end. As the meeting concluded and the humans were escorted to their quarters, Nathan pulled up his data on the architects. The files were mostly empty, with only one line repeated over and over in the ancient records. "They who remember darkness guard the light." That night, as Lisa lay in her assigned room, she thought about Earth and wondered if humanity was ready for whatever role they were being asked to play. Outside her window, she could see other ships arriving at the station. Ships from worlds she had never heard of, carrying people she had never imagined. But none of those people carried weapons. Only humans carried weapons. And somehow, that fact was starting to feel less like a privilege and more like a responsibility that humanity might not be ready to bear. The next morning brought answers that Lisa Monroe wished she had never heard. Elder historian Quindell looked like a living crystal formation, tall as two humans and covered in facets that caught and reflected light in impossible ways. It had lived for over 15,000 years and remembered things that most species had forgotten were ever real. "Come," Quindal said to the human delegation, its voice sounding like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. There are things you must see before you can understand your purpose here. The elder led them deep into the station's core, through corridors that grew older and stranger as they descended. The walls changed from modern metal to something that looked almost organic, with surfaces that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. These sections were built by the architects, Quindal explained. We have maintained them but never understood them fully. Perhaps you will see what we cannot. They entered a vast chamber filled with holographic displays that showed the galaxy in 3 dimensions. Thousands of star systems glowed like tiny lights, connected by travel routes that looked like golden threads. Beautiful, whispered Dr. Price, staring at the display. It was, Quindal agreed. 50,000 years ago, every one of those lights represented a thriving civilization. Trade flowed between worlds. Art and science advanced every day. The galaxy was at peace. What happened? Lisa asked, though she was starting to suspect she didn't want to know. Quindal touched one of the crystals growing from its body, and the display changed. Now many of the lights were dark, and the golden threads looked broken and scattered. The Void Seekers came from somewhere beyond our reality. They were not like anything we understood. They did not want to conquer or rule or even destroy in ways we recognized. They wanted to make things not exist. Not just dead, but never were. Jake felt his soldier's instincts kicking in. How do you fight something like that? You cannot fight what you cannot remember, Quindal said sadly. That was the trap. Every species the Void Seekers touched lost the ability to think about conflict. They became peaceful, yes, but they also became defenseless. And when something is defenseless for long enough, entropy comes to claim it. Nathan was studying the displays carefully. The architects fought them? The architects were the only species that found a solution. They realized that perfect peace was not sustainable. A galaxy without the possibility of conflict was a galaxy that had stopped growing, stopped adapting, stopped fighting to exist. So they created guardians. The crystal being led them to another section of the chamber, where ancient weapons hung in displays like museum pieces. But these weren't just tools of war. They hummed with energy that made the air itself feel alive. These weapons were designed not just to destroy matter, but to preserve memory. Each one contains quantum recording systems that maintain the existence of whatever they protect. But using them requires a mind that can hold both peace and violence at the same time. Like human minds, Lisa said quietly. Exactly like human minds. The architects searched the galaxy for species that retained what they called the warrior's burden, the ability to choose violence for the sake of protecting others. Most species they found were either too violent or became too peaceful after modifications. But their quantum beacons were programmed to activate when the right kind of species achieved space travel. Jake was examining one of the ancient weapons. It looked almost familiar, like someone had taken a human rifle and rebuilt it with technology that shouldn't exist. These beacons, they activated when we started exploring space. The moment your first ship achieved faster-than-light travel, every beacon in the galaxy began singing. After 50,000 years of silence, they announced that new guardians had arrived. Colonel Harrison picked up one of the weapons, and it immediately came to life in his hands. Lights ran along its surface, and displays activated showing information, in symbols that somehow made sense to him even though he had never seen them before. How is this possible? He asked. The architects built these weapons to recognize their inheritors. Your genetic patterns, your neural pathways, even your psychological profiles, somehow they predicted what humans would be like thousands of years before humans existed. Dr. Price was reading data from another display. What happened to the previous guardians? These Corvani that the records mention? Quindal's crystal body dimmed noticeably. They disappeared 50,000 years ago. Their final transmission came from beyond the galactic rim. They said they had found the source of the Void Seekers and were going to end the threat permanently. Did they succeed? Lisa asked. We thought they did. For 50,000 years, the galaxy has been peaceful. No void seeker attacks, no reality erasures, no civilization simply ceasing to exist. We began to believe the threat was over. But, you don't think it's over anymore, Jake said. It wasn't a question. 3 days ago, the first beacon reactivated in 50 millennia. Yesterday, 2 more began singing. This morning, every beacon in the galaxy is active and sending the same message. The Guardians must prepare. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. Prepare for what? Before Quindal could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the station. The crystal being's body flashed with urgent red light as it received some kind of communication. What's happening? Lisa demanded. The Outer Rim monitoring station at Kepler 442 has gone silent, Quindal said, its voice now filled with something that sounded like fear. Not destroyed. Silent. As if it was never there. Jake grabbed one of the ancient weapons from the display. It felt right in his hands, like it had been made specifically for him. How long since the last contact? 17 minutes ago, they sent their regular status report. Now our computers show no record of any station at those coordinates. But the supply ships that were heading there are still following their flight. Plans to deliver materials to something that our sensors say doesn't exist. Lisa looked around the chamber at the ancient displays and weapons, understanding beginning to dawn on her. The Void Seekers. They're back. Impossible, said Nathan. The Corvani stopped them. The Corvani tried to stop them, Quindal corrected. But perhaps they only delayed them. Perhaps the threat was too large for any one species to handle permanently. More alarms sounded, and Veltar appeared in the chamber, its jellyfish-like body pulsing with distressed colors. Elder Quindal, Veltar said urgently, 3 more systems have gone silent. The Vega colonies, the mining platforms at Wolf 359, and the research station at Proxima Centauri. Jake felt his military training take over. How fast is this spreading? Too fast, Veltar replied. At this rate, the entire Outer Rim will be gone within days. Gone where? Lisa asked. Destroyed? No, Quindal said quietly. Erased. As if they never existed at all. The Council databases are automatically updating to remove all records of the lost systems. Soon, most species will not even remember that those places existed. Nathan stared at the galactic display, watching as lights that had shown thriving. Civilizations began winking out one by one. But we'll remember. Humans will remember, Quindal confirmed. Your minds are structured differently. The same neural patterns that allow you to carry weapons also allow you to maintain memories that other species lose. You are immune to the forgetting. Lisa felt the weight of understanding settle on her shoulders. That's why you invited us. Not for diplomacy or trade or cultural exchange. You need us because we're the only ones who can remember what you're fighting. We are not fighting anything, said Veltar sadly. Most council species cannot even understand that there is something to fight. When they see the data about vanishing systems, their minds interpret it as normal maintenance or statistical errors. They literally cannot process the concept of an existential threat. Jake was studying the weapon in his hands, watching as its displays showed tactical information about threats he couldn't see yet. What about Thaklor? He seemed to understand. War leader Thaklor uses illegal genetic modifications to suppress his species' pacification treatments, Quindal explained. It causes him great pain, and it will eventually kill him, but it allows him to remember what his people once were. How many others like him are there? Lisa asked. Perhaps a dozen across the entire galaxy, not nearly enough. The chamber shook slightly as another ship docked with the station. Through the displays, they could see it was a Council military vessel, but it looked nothing like human warships. It was smooth and beautiful with no visible weapons or armor. Your military ships, Jake said. They're not designed for combat. Combat has been unnecessary for 50,000 years, Veltar replied. Our ships are for exploration, rescue, and transportation. The concept of building machines specifically for violence was forgotten. Lisa looked around at her small team of humans and felt the enormity of the situation crushing down on her. You're telling us that humanity might be the only species in the galaxy that can fight back against these void seekers? We are telling you, Quindal said solemnly, that humanity might be the only species in the galaxy that can remember there is something to fight back against. Another alarm sounded, and this time the station's lights flickered. On the galactic display, an entire section near the rim went dark simultaneously. The Cygnus sector, Veltar whispered. 14 civilizations. 3 days after learning about the Void Seekers, the humans faced their first real test. The Council had decided that before humanity could officially become guardians, they needed to prove they truly understood what the role meant. Lisa Monroe stood in the center of the Great Assembly Hall, facing representatives from hundreds of worlds, all waiting to see if humans were worthy of the ancient responsibility. The tests have 3 parts, announced Speaker Kethmoran, the stone-like being whose voice echoed through the massive chamber. First, your species must demonstrate wisdom in the use of violence. Second, you must show the physical capability to serve as guardians. Third, you must prove that your minds can bear the psychological weight of remembering what others forget. Dr. Karen White stepped forward for the first test. She was a professor of ethics from Earth, chosen because she had spent her life thinking about right and wrong in difficult situations. Her gray hair was pulled back simply, and she wore the plain blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. I will represent humanity in the wisdom test, she said clearly. The Council's greatest philosopher, a being called Mindshaper Iluthai that looked like a floating brain surrounded by glowing tendrils, posed the first question. Human Karen White, your species claims the right to carry instruments of destruction. How do you justify bringing tools of death into a place dedicated to peace? Karen had prepared for this question, but standing before hundreds of alien minds still made her nervous. Because peace without the ability to defend it is not peace at all. It's just the quiet moment before someone stronger decides to take what you have. But violence creates more violence, argued another philosopher, this one resembling a flower made of light. How can you claim that weapons preserve peace when they are designed to cause harm? Weapons don't cause harm, Karen replied. People cause harm. Weapons can be used to protect or to attack, to build or to destroy. The choice isn't in the tool, it's in the person holding it. A third philosopher, shaped like a spiral of silver smoke, asked the hardest question yet. Your species has used these weapons against each other for thousands of years. How do we know you won't turn them against us? Karen was quiet for a moment, thinking carefully. Because we know what it feels like to be defenseless. We know what it means to watch something you love get destroyed while you can't stop it. We carry weapons not because we want to hurt others, but because we remember what it feels like to be hurt. The philosophers whispered among themselves in languages that sounded like music and mathematics. Finally, Mindshaper Iluthai spoke again. The human demonstrates understanding of the moral complexity involved in bearing arms. We judge this portion of the test acceptable. The second test required Marine Sergeant Alex Turner to show human combat abilities. Alex was young and strong, with quick reflexes and years of training and fighting techniques from across human history. The testing chamber was a large, empty room that could create holographic enemies and situations. Council, security forces watched from behind protective barriers as Alex prepared for the simulation. Begin test scenario 7 alpha, announced the computer in a voice that somehow spoke every language at once. Suddenly, Alex was surrounded by hostile holograms that looked like armored creatures with too many arms and glowing red eyes. They moved fast and attacked with energy weapons that could have killed him if they were real. Alex moved like a dancer, but a deadly one. He rolled, jumped, and spun through the attacking enemies, using his rifle to pick off targets while constantly moving to avoid their return fire. But what impressed the watching aliens most was what happened when civilian holograms appeared in the crossfire. Without hesitation, Alex changed his entire fighting style. He put himself between the civilians and the enemies, taking hits on his armor to protect people who weren't even real. When a holographic child was trapped behind enemy lines, Alex abandoned his safe position and fought his way through twice as many enemies to carry the child to safety. When the simulation ended, Alex was breathing hard but uninjured. The chamber fell silent as the council members tried to process what they had seen. War leader Thaklor stepped forward, his scarred face showing something that might have been approval. In 50,000 years of council records, no species has ever prioritized protection over victory in combat scenarios. Most cannot even understand the difference. What do you mean? Asked Colonel Harrison. Watch, Thaklor said, activating a recording of the last species to attempt the Guardian tests. The hologram showed creatures that looked like metallic spiders, fighting the same scenario Alex had just completed. They destroyed every enemy efficiently and without emotion, but they also destroyed anything else that got in their way, including the civilians they were supposed to protect. They won the battle, Thaklor explained, but they lost the test. Guardians must understand that some things are more important than winning. The third test was the hardest. Counselor Mary Johnson, humanity's best expert on psychology and mental health, had to undergo something called a neural probe that would examine her thoughts and memories. This test is necessary, explained the council's chief medical officer, a floating cluster of lights called Dr. Rinshaw. Guardian minds must be structured in a very specific way. They must be able to hold thoughts that cause other species to become confused or even insane. Mary lay on a table that adjusted itself to fit her human body, while alien machines that looked like metal flowers positioned themselves around her head. Beginning deep neural scan, announced Dr. Rinshaw, searching for cognitive patterns consistent with Guardian psychology. Mary felt a strange tingling in her skull as the machines began reading her thoughts. On screens around the room, displays showed the electrical activity in her brain as the machines probed deeper and deeper into her mind. Fascinating, Dr. Rinshaw said after several minutes. The human brain contains what we call controlled aggression pathways. Most species have either no aggression controls or total aggression suppression, but humans can choose violence or peace independently of their emotional state. What does that mean? Asked Lisa. It means, said Elder Quindal, that humans can be angry and still choose not to fight, or they can be calm and still choose to fight if fighting is necessary. This psychological flexibility is extremely rare. The neural probe went deeper, and Mary's memories began appearing on the screens. The council members saw flashes of human history, wars and peace treaties, acts of incredible violence alongside acts of incredible mercy. Curious, said Dr. Rinshaw. The human mind contains clear memories of violence, but also clear memories of choosing to stop violence when it was no longer needed. This species has the ability to escalate and de-escalate conflict consciously. But then the probe found something that made all the alien doctors step back in surprise. What is it? Mary asked, feeling dizzy from the mental examination. Your species, Dr. Rinshaw said slowly, has neural pathways that we have only seen in one other place. The preserved brain scans of the architects themselves. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the background hum of the station's systems seemed to quiet down. That's impossible, Nathan said. Humans evolved on Earth. We had no contact with the architects. Perhaps, said Quindal thoughtfully, the architects had contact with your ancestors. Or perhaps they influenced human evolution from a distance. Or perhaps... The crystal being paused, considering possibilities that seemed to frighten it. Perhaps what? Lisa demanded. Perhaps the architects never left the galaxy at all. Perhaps they simply chose to start over, to become something new, something that could grow up naturally in the galaxy they were trying to protect. The implications of this idea hung in the air like a heavy weight. If humans were somehow connected to the architects, it would explain the weapons that fit their hands perfectly, and the beacons that had waited specifically for them. But it would also mean that humanity had inherited not just weapons and responsibilities, but enemies that had already destroyed their predecessors once before. The tests are complete, Speaker Kethmoran announced. The human delegation has demonstrated wisdom, capability, and the correct psychological structure for guardian duties. By ancient law and current necessity, we formally recognize humanity as inheritors of the Guardian Compact. The council members began a strange ceremony, with each species making sounds or movements that seemed to mean approval. But Lisa noticed that many of them looked scared rather than happy. "What aren't you telling us?" she asked Quindal quietly. "The last time Guardians were active," the crystal being whispered back, "they attracted the attention of things that had been sleeping in the dark between galaxies. Appointing new Guardians is necessary, but it also sends a signal across reality itself that this galaxy is defended again. And that's bad because signals can be tracked. And things that hunt Guardians have had 50,000 years to grow hungry." As the ceremony continued around them, Lisa looked at her small team of humans and wondered if they were humanity's greatest hope or its greatest mistake. Outside the station, in the darkness between stars, something that had been waiting for a very long time felt the Guardian beacon singing and began moving toward the sound. 2 weeks after the Guardian ceremony, Lieutenant Grace Kelly found patterns in the data that made her blood run cold. Grace was 28 years old and had been trained by Earth's best intelligence agencies to spot connections that others missed. She sat in her small office aboard the Council station, surrounded by holographic displays showing star charts, communication logs, and reports from across the galaxy. "Colonel Harrison needs to see this," she muttered, standing up so quickly that her chair spun backward. She found Jake in the human section's common area, teaching basic combat techniques to a group of young Council interns. Most of them were species that had never even thought about fighting, but they watched with fascination as Jake demonstrated how to disable an opponent without causing permanent harm. "Sir, we have a problem," Grace said quietly. Jake dismissed the interns and followed Grace back to her office. The displays she showed him made his soldier's instincts scream warnings. "These are the locations of the systems that have gone silent," Grace said, highlighting dozens of points on the galactic map. At first, everyone assumed they were random attacks. But look at this. She overlaid another map showing ancient patrol routes that the architects had used 50,000 years ago. The vanishing systems perfectly matched the old routes. "It's retracing the architect's path," Jake said grimly. "Exactly. Whatever's doing this, it knows where the architects went. It's following their route backward, undoing everything they built." Dr. Nathan Price had been studying genetic samples from the so-called pacified species, and his discoveries were just as disturbing. He called Lisa Monroe to his laboratory in the station's science section. "The modifications these species made, to themselves," Nathan said, gesturing at complex DNA models floating in the air. "I thought they just removed aggressive tendencies, but it's much worse than that." Lisa looked at the genetic displays, trying to understand what Nathan had found. Worse how? They didn't just remove aggression, they removed entire categories of perception. These species literally cannot see certain types of patterns, cannot process certain kinds of information, cannot form certain types of memories. What kind of information? Nathan pulled up brain scans from several species. Anything related to existential threats. Their minds have built-in filters that automatically reinterpret dangerous information as something harmless. When they see data about the vanishing systems, their brains literally change it into routine maintenance reports. But that's insane. How could they survive? For 50,000 years they didn't need to. The galaxy was safe. But now... Nathan's voice trailed off as he realized the full implications of what he had discovered. Now they're blind to the thing that's hunting them, Lisa finished. Meanwhile, Colonel Harrison was conducting joint training exercises with Council security forces and learning exactly how helpless they were. The Council security teams were made up of beings from dozens of worlds, all dedicated to keeping the peace through talking and understanding rather than fighting. Jake watched a team of Altarian peacekeepers try to handle a simulated terrorist scenario. When the holographic terrorists appeared, most of the peacekeepers simply stood there, their minds unable to process what they were seeing. "Simulation terminated," Jake called out. "What happened?" Captain Realdar, a tall, blue-skinned Altarian with large, gentle eyes, looked confused. "I apologize, Colonel Harrison. The simulation seems to have malfunctioned. The computer created impossible scenarios involving beings who wanted to cause harm for no logical reason." "That wasn't a malfunction," Jake said gently. Those were terrorists, people who use violence to try to get what they want. But that makes no sense, Realdar replied. If they want something, they should simply ask for it through proper channels. Violence cannot accomplish anything useful. Jake realized that Realdar's species literally could not understand the concept of using force to achieve goals. Their minds had been modified so completely that they saw violence as a natural impossibility, like trying to breathe water or walk through walls. The most chilling discovery came from Ambassador Monroe herself. She had been meeting with various council leaders, trying to understand the political situation better, when she received an unexpected visitor. The being who entered her office was dying. Zacht had once been a proud Vexi warrior, but genetic modifications had turned his species into gentle philosophers centuries ago. Now sustained only by illegal neural boosters that were slowly killing him. He was one of the last beings in the galaxy who could remember what his people had once been. Ambassador Monroe, Zacht said in a voice like rustling paper, his forearms shaking with the effort of staying upright. I come to you in my final hours to deliver a warning that only human minds can understand. What kind of warning? Zacht activated a small device that filled Lisa's office with scrambled energy fields. This conversation must not be recorded by council systems. What I tell you would be automatically deleted from their databases as impossible information. He handed her a data crystal that pulsed with its own internal light. Before my people became peaceful, we were the greatest warriors in the galaxy. Our final battles were against the Void Seekers, and we learned things about them that the architects never knew. What things? The Void Seekers are not invaders. From another dimension, Zacht wheezed. They are entropy itself given form and purpose. They seek out civilizations that have achieved perfect peace because such civilizations have stopped growing, stopped changing, stopped fighting to exist. Lisa felt ice forming in her stomach. You're saying they're attracted to peaceful societies? More than attracted. They are drawn to them like gravity pulls objects together. A galaxy at perfect peace is a galaxy ready to die, and entropy always comes to claim what is ready to die. Zacht's breathing was becoming more labored. The neural boosters were failing, and his natural genetic modifications were reasserting themselves. The architects realized this too late. He continued with difficulty. They thought they could fight the Void Seekers with weapons and technology. But the Void Seekers cannot be defeated by force. They can only be balanced. Balanced how? By ensuring that peace is always chosen rather than imposed. By maintaining the possibility of conflict even while choosing harmony. By remembering that existence itself is a struggle against entropy. Zacht collapsed into one of Lisa's chairs, his 4 arms hanging limp. The Corvani understood this before they vanished. They went to find the source of the Void Seekers, but they went too far. They tried to destroy entropy itself, and entropy destroyed them instead. What do we do differently? You maintain the balance. You keep the galaxy alive by ensuring it never becomes perfectly peaceful. You be the warriors who choose not to fight so that peace has meaning. The warrior philosopher's eyes were growing, dim as his illegal modifications finally failed. The beacons sing because the balance is broken. Too much peace for too long. The Void Seekers return to correct the imbalance in the only way they understand. How much time do we have? They move slowly, Zacht whispered. They erase carefully, thoroughly, but each erasure makes them stronger, and each erasure brings them closer to the galactic core, where the real populations live. Months, perhaps, maybe less. With his final breath, Zacht spoke words that would haunt Lisa's dreams. The hunters from the void have returned, and this time, they remember what guardians taste like. That night, Lisa called an emergency meeting of all the humans on the station. As they gathered in their secure conference room, she looked at the faces of her people and realized how small their group really was. We're not just diplomats anymore, she told them. We're the only species in the galaxy that can see what's coming. The only ones who can remember the threat even after it arrives. How many ships do we have? Jake asked practically. 14. Vessels in the entire human space fleet, Grace reported. Against something that's already erased hundreds of systems. What about allies? Asked Nathan. Beings like Thackler who remember the old ways? Maybe a dozen individuals across the entire galaxy, Lisa said. Not nearly enough. Dr. Karen White, who had been quiet during the meeting, finally spoke up. Maybe it's not about having enough people to fight. Maybe it's about being the right people to remember. What do you mean? Zacht said the Void Seekers are attracted to perfect peace, but they're also drawn to perfect war. Their entropy, they want systems to reach their end states. Our job might not be to fight them directly, but to keep the galaxy from reaching the kind of perfect peace that attracts them in the first place. Outside the station, long-range sensors detected something that the computers automatically filed as stellar debris. But Grace Kelly's instruments, calibrated specifically for things that shouldn't exist, registered it as something else entirely. Something massive was moving through the outer rim, leaving absolutely nothing behind it. Not destruction, not ruins, not even empty space, just absence. The Void Seekers had stopped being subtle, and they were accelerating toward the heart of the galaxy, where billions of peaceful beings lived in blissful ignorance of the entropy that was coming to erase them from existence. Humanity's real test was about to begin. The crisis began at 0347 Galactic Standard Time, when the Andromeda Relay Station stopped existing. Captain Steve Rogers was commanding the human patrol ship Freedom's Edge when their communications officer picked up the impossible signal. Lieutenant Pete Walsh had been monitoring routine transmissions from the relay station when suddenly there was nothing to monitor. "Sir," Pete said, his voice tight with confusion, "I'm getting automated reports from supply ships heading to deliver materials to the Andromeda station, but our sensors show nothing at those coordinates." "Equipment malfunction?" Steve asked, though his instincts were already telling him otherwise. "No, sir. The supply ship's navigation computers still have the station in their databases, but our deep space telescopes show empty space. It's like the station was never there except for the ships that remember flying to it." Steve Rogers was a veteran of 3 interstellar conflicts, a man who had learned to trust his gut when technology failed to make sense. Set course for the Andromeda coordinates, maximum speed. The Freedom's Edge was one of humanity's newest ships, equipped with weapons and sensors designed using principles learned from the architect's ancient technology. As they approached the coordinates where the relay station should have been, their instruments began detecting things that shouldn't exist. "Captain," called out Dr. Emma Parker, the ship's science officer, "I'm reading quantum signatures in the empty space, traces of something that used to be here." "Used to be here when?" "That's the problem, sir. According to the quantum echoes, something massive was here just 6 hours ago. But according to our gravitational sensors, nothing has been at these coordinates for millions of years." Steve felt cold sweat on his forehead. "Are you telling me that something erased not just the station, but the fact that it ever existed?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you, sir." Back at the council station, emergency meetings were being held every hour as more reports came in. But Ambassador Lisa Monroe was discovering just how helpless most council species were when facing this kind of threat. "We must be experiencing widespread equipment failures," insisted Coordinator Velnith, a floating, cloud-like being that represented the Central Worlds Alliance. "Our sensors are obviously malfunctioning if they show empty space where we know installations exist." "It's not equipment failure," Lisa said patiently. "These locations are being attacked by something that erases them from reality." "That is impossible," replied Science Minister Cordall, whose metallic body gleamed under the conference room's lights. "Nothing can make something never exist. This violates basic principles of physics and logic." Elder Quindall tried to explain. "Minister Cordall, your species underwent cognitive modifications 3,000 years ago. Your mind literally cannot process information about existential erasure. When you see the data, your brain automatically reinterprets it as equipment problems." "That is ridiculous," Cordall said firmly. "I am looking at the data right now, and it clearly shows routine maintenance being performed at these locations. Why are you trying to convince me that maintenance is somehow threatening?" Lisa watched in frustration as Cordall's eyes looked directly at reports about vanishing systems and interpreted them as normal operational updates. The genetic modifications were so complete that most council species couldn't even see the threat. When it was explained to them directly, only war leader Thaklor and a handful of other individuals who used illegal genetic treatments could understand what was happening. But they were scattered across the galaxy, and most were dying from the medical treatments that allowed them to remember. The situation became truly terrifying when the first Void Seeker manifested in council space. Captain Rogers and his crew were investigating another vanished outpost when their sensors detected something that made no scientific sense. The object was enormous, easily the size of a small moon, but it existed partially in normal space and partially somewhere else. "What am I looking at?" Steve asked his science officer. Dr. Parker was staring at her instruments with a mixture of fascination and horror. "Sir, it appears to be a massive entity that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It's partially in what looks like reverse time." "Reverse time?" "Its quantum signature suggests that it experiences causality flowing backward. Events that happen near it tend to unhappen, starting with the most recent and working backward through time." As they watched, the Void Seeker began approaching a small research station on a nearby moon. The station's automated defenses activated, firing energy weapons at the approaching entity. But instead of the weapons damaging the Void Seeker, the Aito weapons seemed to unfire themselves, with the energy beams flowing backward into the station's guns. Then the station's crew began forgetting that they had ever fired. Then they forgot that anything was approaching. Then they forgot that they had ever built defenses. Within minutes, they forgot that they had ever built the station at all. "Sir," Pete Walsh said from the communication station, "I'm receiving a distress signal from that research station. What do they say?" "They're asking for help, sir, but they don't remember what they need help with. They know something's wrong, but they can't remember what." Dr. Parker was frantically taking readings. "Captain, the station is being erased from existence starting with its most recent additions and working backward. At this rate, in about 20 minutes, it will never have existed at all." Steve made a decision that went against every military protocol he knew. "All stop. Do not approach the entity. Do not fire weapons. Do not attempt rescue operations." "Sir?" asked his tactical officer. "If that thing erases effects before causes, then everything we do to fight it will only make it stronger. The research station crew doesn't remember us, because we haven't tried to help them yet. If we do try to help them, we might just give that thing more reality to erase." They watched helplessly as the research station faded from existence like a photograph being slowly erased. First, the newest equipment disappeared, then the older structures, then the landing pads, then finally the foundation itself. Within an hour, the moon's surface showed no sign that anything had ever been built there. But the worst part was the communications logs. The Freedom's Edge had recordings of conversations with the research station crew from just days before. But as the IQ erasure completed, those recordings began changing. The voices became unfamiliar. The conversations became nonsensical. And finally, the record showed that the communications had never happened at all. "Sir," Dr. Parker said quietly, "I'm starting to forget why we came to this system." "Write everything down," Steve ordered. "Physical notes on paper. Don't trust the computer logs, they're changing too." Similar encounters were happening throughout the galaxy, but most species couldn't remember them afterward. Council military ships would investigate disappearances, encounter Void Seekers, and then forget that anything had happened. Only human vessels maintained coherent records of the encounters. Dr. Nathan Price, working frantically in his laboratory on the council station, made a breakthrough that explained why humans were immune to the forgetting. "It's not just our ability to remember violence," he told Lisa during an emergency briefing. "It's our relationship with time itself. Human consciousness exists in what we call narrative time. We experience our lives as stories with beginnings, middles, and ends. What does that have to do with the Void Seekers? Most other species experience time as a series of present moments. They live in the now and adapt to whatever circumstances exist. But humans remember the past and plan for the future as conscious, deliberate activities. Our minds create what psychologists call temporal continuity. We maintain a consistent, sense of self across time. Lisa was beginning to understand. So when the Void Seekers erase something from the past, other species just adapt to the new present. But humans notice that the story doesn't make sense anymore. Exactly. We're natural historians. We remember not just what happened, but what it meant, and we notice when meanings change or disappear. This discovery led to humanity's first real success against the Void Seekers. If human minds could maintain memories even when reality was being rewritten, then humans could serve as anchors for existence itself. Working with the few remaining unmodified aliens like Thaklor, human teams began creating what they called memory archives, quantum storage devices that recorded not just data about civilizations, but the quantum signatures of their existence itself. The devices worked by linking to human consciousness. As long as a human mind remembered that something existed, the quantum archive could maintain its reality even if Void Seekers tried to erase it. But the process came with a terrible cost. Humans who operated the memory archives began experiencing what Dr. Price called temporal strain. Their minds were being forced to remember multiple conflicting versions of reality simultaneously. Lieutenant Grace Kelly volunteered for the first full-scale test. Connected to a memory archive protecting a small colony world, she had to consciously maintain her knowledge of the colony's existence, while Void Seekers attempted to erase it. For 3 days, Grace fought a mental battle against entropy itself. She watched through the archive's sensors as the colony's history was systematically erased. Buildings unbuilt, children unborn, discoveries. The final battle for the galaxy's existence began not with explosions or laser fire, but with the simple act of remembering. Ambassador Lisa Monroe stood in the emergency command center that humanity had hastily constructed in the Council Station's deepest levels. Around her, humans and the few remaining unmodified aliens worked frantically to coordinate a defense against an enemy that most of the galaxy couldn't even see. "Status report," Lisa called out. Lieutenant Grace Kelly, still recovering from her ordeal with the memory archive, managed the tactical displays. Void Seekers have erased everything beyond the Middle Rim. 47 major systems gone in the last week. At their current rate of acceleration, they'll reach the core worlds in 6 days. Dr. Nathan Price had been working without sleep for 3 days straight, his eyes red with exhaustion and discovery. "Lisa, I figured out what the architects really did wrong. They tried to fight entropy directly, but entropy isn't something you can defeat with weapons. It's something you have to redirect." "Redirect how?" "The Void Seekers are drawn to systems that have stopped changing, stopped growing, but they avoid areas where growth and conflict are actively happening. They're not evil. They're just doing what entropy does. They eliminate stagnation." Colonel Jake Harrison was coordinating humanity's small fleet from his position at the military command station. "So we need to make the galaxy less peaceful?" "Not less peaceful," Dr. Karen White interjected. She had been studying the philosophical implications of their situation. "We need to make peace more active. Peace that requires constant choice, rather than peace that's been hardwired into genetics." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Young Pete Walsh, working on communications, had been monitoring the quantum signatures that the architect's weapons produced. While analyzing the data, he noticed something that the others had missed. "The Guardian weapons," Pete said excitedly, "they're not just tools for fighting, they're reality anchors. Each one creates a field that preserves the existence of whatever it's protecting." Nathan looked up from his genetic analysis. "That's it. The architects didn't build weapons to destroy the Void Seekers. They built them to maintain the balance between order and entropy." Lisa felt understanding dawn like sunrise. "We don't have to fight the Void Seekers at all. We just have to give them what they're really looking for, which is systems that are ready to grow instead of systems that are ready to die." Working together, the humans and their few allies developed a desperate plan. Instead of trying to protect every world individually, they would use the Guardian weapons to create what they called growth nodes, quantum fields that would maintain the possibility of change and conflict throughout the galaxy. But the plan required something that terrified the council members who could understand it. The genetic modifications that had created galactic peace would have to be partially reversed. Not completely. The galaxy didn't need to return to constant warfare, but enough to restore the neural pathways that allowed species to perceive and respond to existential threats. "You're asking us to make our people capable of violence again," said Speaker Kethmoran, the ancient stone being whose voice carried the weight of eons. "We're asking you to make them capable of choice again," Lisa replied. "The choice between peace and conflict is what makes peace meaningful. Without that choice, peace is just another form of death." The first test came when a void seeker approached the heavily populated Vega system. Instead of trying to fight it directly, Captain Rogers positioned his ship at the edge of the system and activated one of the Guardian weapons in its new configuration. The weapon didn't fire energy beams or projectiles. Instead, it created a field that restored the modified minds of everyone in the system to their natural, unaltered state. The effect was immediate and traumatic. Millions of beings who had lived their entire lives incapable of even thinking about conflict suddenly remembered what their ancestors had been like. Some panicked, others became confused, but most importantly, they began to change. Scientists started wondering what would happen if their research went wrong. Artists began creating works that explored darker emotions. Philosophers started asking uncomfortable questions about the nature of existence. The Vega system, which had been perfectly peaceful and static for thousands of years, suddenly became dynamic and unpredictable again. The Void Seeker stopped approaching. Its quantum signature shifted from predatory focus to what looked almost like confusion. After hovering at the system's edge for several hours, it turned away and moved toward easier targets. "It worked," Dr. Parker announced from the Freedom's edge. "The Void Seeker is moving away from Vega." But the victory came with costs that no one had anticipated. The newly unmodified beings in the Vega system began experiencing emotions and thoughts they had no framework for understanding. Crime rates spiked, as some individuals struggled with aggressive impulses they had never felt before. Others became paralyzed by new fears about death and conflict. Most importantly, they could now see the Void Seekers coming. "Help us," came the desperate transmission from Vega Prime. "We can see something approaching the outer systems, something that shouldn't exist. Our ancestors' weapons don't work against it. What do we do?" Lisa realized that restoring the ability to perceive threats wasn't enough. The galaxy's species needed to relearn skills that had been forgotten for millennia. "We teach them," she said simply. What followed was the strangest war in galactic history. Instead of fighting the Void Seekers directly, humanity became teachers. Human soldiers like Sergeant Alex Turner traveled to threatened worlds, not to fight battles, but to teach local populations how to fight for themselves. Human diplomats, like Dr. White, helped civilizations develop new philosophies that could accommodate both peace and the possibility of conflict. Human scientists like Nathan Price worked to develop modified versions of the Guardian weapons that could be used by non-human hands. The process was slow and difficult. Many species struggled with their newly restored capabilities. Some worlds descended into chaos as beings who had been artificially peaceful for generations suddenly had to deal with natural aggression and competition. But something wonderful began happening too. Art became more interesting as artists explored the full range of emotions. Science advanced faster as researchers were willing to take risks that might fail. Societies became more dynamic as citizens could choose their values rather than having them genetically imposed. Most importantly, the galaxy began to grow again. The Void Seekers found themselves in an impossible situation. They were drawn to systems that had achieved perfect stagnation, but every system they approached was actively changing and growing. Instead of finding easy targets ready for entropy's embrace, they found vibrant civilizations that were fighting to become better versions of themselves. The final confrontation came when the largest Void Seeker approached the Council Station itself. But by then, the station had changed completely. The sterile, peaceful halls were now filled with beings who were actively choosing cooperation over conflict, peace over war, growth over stagnation. Ambassador Monroe stood in the station's central chamber, surrounded by representatives from hundreds of worlds as the massive entity approached. In her hands, she held one of the architect's guardian weapons, its quantum fields active and ready. But she didn't fire. Instead, she broadcast a message that reached every mind on the station. We choose to exist. We choose to grow. We choose to change. And we choose to remember that these choices matter because alternatives exist. The Void Seeker stopped just outside the station's defensive perimeter. For long minutes, it hung in space like a dark moon, its quantum signatures shifting between aggression and something that might have been confusion. Then slowly it began to turn away. "It's leaving," reported Grace Kelly from the sensor station. "Where is it going?" asked Jake. Dr. Price checked his readings. "Back toward the galactic rim, it's retreating." But Nathan's next words explained why. "Look at the galaxy-wide sensors. Every system we've restored is now generating what the readings call dynamic growth signatures. The Void Seekers aren't retreating from us. They're being called to other galaxies that have achieved the kind of perfect stagnation they're designed to correct." In the months that followed, humanity helped establish what became known as the New Balance. Guardian stations were built throughout the galaxy, each one staffed by humans and their allies who maintained the possibility of conflict while choosing peace. The Council's laws were rewritten to require that every member species retain at least some individuals with unmodified minds, people who could perceive threats and make hard choices when necessary. These individuals became known as Rememberers, and they worked closely with human guardians to maintain galactic stability. Children across the galaxy began learning new lessons. They learned about cooperation and kindness, but they also learned about courage and the willingness to fight for what was right. They learned that peace was not the absence of conflict, but the conscious choice to resolve conflict without violence, whenever possible. Most importantly, they learned that someone must always remember that choices have alternatives, because choice without alternatives is not choice at all.